Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
The hunt for Libya's Gaddafi continues with the aid of British special forces. Rights groups urge India to probe mass graves in Kashmir. And Iraqi Kurds condemn Turkish airstrikes on Kurdistan Region. Mosaic, World News from the Middle East, begins now.
فقد نقلت وكالة رويترز عن مصادر في الثوار أنهم يحاصرون معمر القذافي وعددا من أبنائه.
Reuters quoted sources of the revolutionaries saying they are surrounding Muammar al-Gaddafi and some of his children in a building near Bab al-Azizia compound in Tripoli. This comes as Gaddafi gave a new audio speech calling on Libyans to resist the revolutionaries and march to Tripoli to liberate the city. Corinthia Bab Africa Hotel in central Tripoli, where foreign journalists are staying, was subjected to shelling and heavy gunfire by Gaddafi's battalions.
لقصف ولإطلاق نار كثيف من قبل كتائب القذافي. وقد شهدت شوارع العاصمة معارك بين قناصة.
The streets of the capital witnessed battles between the revolutionaries and the battalion's snipers. The revolutionaries used anti-aircraft weapons and rockets to disperse the snipers stationed on rooftops near the hotel. It is worth mentioning that the hotel is located 1.5 kilometers from the Green Square near the Old City.
عن الساحة الخضراء قبالة المدينة العتيقة. وبينما بدأت عملية اقتحام حي أبو سليم في طرابلس.
While the revolutionaries started storming into the Abu Salim neighborhood in Tripoli, where the remnants of Gaddafi's battalions are entrenched, the British Defense Minister announced that NATO is supporting the revolutionaries on the ground, especially in their pursuit of Muammar al-Gaddafi.
بملاحقة معمر القذافي.
Intensive gunfire subsided in the capital Tripoli, but battles in the city have not ended. In the past few hours, the revolutionaries focused on maintaining control and preventing a security breakdown in certain areas, while preparing to storm the Abu Salim neighborhood, which is still not under their control. They believe the Libyan colonel's son, Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi, is hiding in this densely populated neighborhood, which is impeding the fighters' mobilization. Reports coming out of Tripoli indicate that gunfire is occasionally heard and that the revolutionaries are preoccupied with taking war spoils found in several civilian and military facilities. As of this moment, the exhaustive search is still focused on the most important target, Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi. It is worth mentioning that Libyan revolutionaries trying to capture Gaddafi are receiving direct support from NATO, which said in a report that its special forces are on the ground in Libya.
We never comment on our special forces. It would compromise their security. It is fair to say, however, that NATO is providing intelligence and reconnaissance assets to help in the hunt for Colonel Gaddafi and indeed the remnants of the regime.
Various news agencies also spoke of international help, indicating that NATO members are present in the eastern front of Libya, from where the revolutionaries are trying to advance. They are trying to move toward the city of Sirte, but are being confronted by the battalions.
ومع تهاوي قدرات القذافي العسكرية في معظم أرجاء ليبيا برزت في الساعات القليلة الماضية.
With the disintegration of Gaddafi's military capabilities in most parts of Libya, NATO and the US were apprehensive in the past few hours that gunmen may seize traditional Libyan weapons, especially the mobile missiles and anti-aircraft weapons, and deliver them to the West's adversaries. For this reason, some revolutionaries say they are keen to cooperate with the elites of the old regime to avoid what they referred to as the cleansing of the country's elites, the way Iraq did after the invasion in 2003.
Meanwhile, chair of the Libyan National Transitional Council, Mustafa Abdul Jalil, said the council secured large amounts of fuel, food, and medicine in Tripoli, and Azawiya, which will be sufficient for all of Libya.
I extend this call
أمام الضعف الواضح لقوات القذافي المحاصرة لهذه المدن.
In the face of the clear weakness and disarray of Gaddafi's forces that besiege these areas and cities.
بأن الأمر بات بيد أهالي تلك المناطق.
And therefore the situation is in the hands of the locals in these areas.
ولم يعد هناك عذرا لعدم الالتحاق بالثورة.
And there are no more excuses for not joining the revolution.
عليهم تشكيل مجالس محلية.
They must form local councils.
واختيار من يمثلهم في المجلس الوطني.
And they must choose who will represent them in the NTC.
واللحاق بركب الثورة.
أعلن المرصد السوري لحقوق الإنسان أن سيدة سورية قتلت صباح اليوم في قرية قرب مدينة.
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said a Syrian woman was killed this morning in a village near the city of Al-Mayadin in Deir ez-Zor province. The observatory indicated that renowned cartoonist Ali Ferzat was severely beaten after getting kidnapped. Ferzat's son Mohammed said his father was savagely assaulted and beaten, and his car was smashed by a group of masked men as he was driving through Umayyin Square in Damascus. They kidnapped him and broke his hand, then tossed him on the airport road.
ثم ألقوه بعد كسر يده على طريق المطار.
4 were killed in Homs when Syrian security forces opened fire at the protests. Meanwhile, 2 were killed and 3 were injured, including 1 in critical condition, after security forces opened fire on a rally welcoming the UN Humanitarian Commission in Talbisa, north of Homs.
August 24, 2011. The martyr was peacefully protesting to welcome the UN Fact-Finding Committee.
According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a young man was tortured to death Wednesday morning after security forces arrested him a week ago after storming the city of Khamshikhon in the countryside of Idlib. In addition, Harasta and Rif Dimashq was raided and dozens were arrested. The relentless protests are met by continuous arrests. 120 people were taken in the latest arrest campaign on Tuesday. According to rights activists, security forces abused the detainees, destroyed furniture in some houses, and the properties of people wanted by security institutions. In Rif Dimashq, night protests occurred in Duma, Daria, Harasta, Kanakar, Azabadani, Kiswa, and Medaya, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The neighborhoods of Fadiya, Bayada, and Azir Street in Homs also witnessed raids and gunfire.
The situation in Syria has reached a phase in which the unarmed peaceful people are facing tanks, warplanes, and even shelling by naval ships from the sea. So we are in a state of war. But so far, we insist on remaining peaceful.
New chants were heard today during the peaceful protests, indicating the ceiling of the demands they started with in March has been raised. The slogans changed from "the protector is the thief" to "the people want the downfall of the regime" and "the people want the departure of President Bashar al-Assad" to "the people want a national council immediately." The formation of a national council was announced in Istanbul on Tuesday, an indication that the point of no return has been reached. This council immediately explained its cause and positions to the international community. Its delegation visited the British Foreign Ministry in London.
We requested Britain renew the international pressure on the Assad regime on all levels. We have not requested a military intervention as many are calling for. As I mentioned, we have called for imposing a no-fly zone because at the moment they are shelling from the air and from the sea. This happened in Latakia. We requested Britain stress this issue at the Security Council.
Meanwhile, state media in Damascus is reporting that the Syrian army and security forces continue to storm the cities in order to cleanse them of armed Islamist terrorist groups. Hayan Yaqub, BBC.
The fragile ceasefire between the Palestinians and the occupation is entering a new phase amid Israeli threats to continue targeting Islamic Jihad members in Gaza. 5 people were killed and dozens were injured over the past 24 hours in a series of airstrikes, with the latest targeting the town of Beit Lahia. 1 Palestinian was martyred and 30 others, including women and children, were injured in the pre-dawn raid. Our correspondent Bassam al-Madhoun reports from Gaza.
بسام المدهون.
Despite the desire of both sides to restore calm to the region, Israel's breach of its truce with the Palestinian factions last Sunday by killing at least 5 Palestinians has further escalated the situation. This comes amid the Palestinians' rage and calls for a response to the Israeli occupation's crimes.
This is an ugly and heinous crime committed by a brutal enemy that only understands the language of blood and destruction. May God bless our martyrs.
Islamic Jihad, which continues to launch missiles towards Israel, is the main target of the Israeli war machinery, as confirmed by Israeli news agencies, and this will likely leave the door open for further confrontations.
We are ready to confront this enemy using all of our military forces and weapons.
The intensive efforts aimed at ending the escalation and abiding by the truce have failed to contain the growing crisis. Some believe it is part of an Israeli policy in which Israel is seeking to divert attention from its global political problems.
It's clear that Israel has breached the truce by adopting a new formula under the slogan of continuing the aggression and assassinations, targeting not only members of the Palestinian resistance, but also civilians, in addition to targeting civil associations. They are doing that while trying to show that they are abiding by the truce. They are trying to mislead the international community by demanding the Palestinian resistance commits to the truce.
Under its new formula, Israel is imposing its conditions and leaving the Palestinians to carry the burden. This is warning of a nightmare-filled future. Bassam Al-Madhoun, Dubai TV, the Gaza Strip.
Truce announced by Palestinian terrorists is apparently over after more than 20 rockets pounded into the south of the country in the past 24 hours. A short time ago, one rocket fell in the Sdot Negev Regional Council. No damage or injuries were reported. Last night, a 9-month-old baby girl was lightly injured after a Grad missile landed in the Chof Ashkelon Regional Council. The baby and her mother were inside the car when it was struck by a rocket, causing it to explode in flames. The missile attacks continued well into the night, with 2 more rockets landing in Beersheva. The Iron Dome system intercepted one of the projectiles, but the second one exploded in the city without causing damage. The renewed barrage of rockets hit southern communities, striking areas around Ofakim, Netivot, and elsewhere in the western Negev. Most of the rockets exploded in open areas in the Eshkol Regional Council without causing injury or damage. Returning now to the continuing rocket fire in southern Israel, and we are joined in the studio by former Director General of the Prime Minister's Office, Dr. Yossi Ben-Aaron. Dr. Ben-Aaron, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Clearly, the so-called truce announced by the terrorists can't be trusted. More than 20 rockets have fallen over the past 24 hours. Are we moving close to the time that Israel will be forced to have a major land operation in order to change the current status quo in Gaza?
Well, that's the dilemma. You have to take a decision. You want to neutralize or even remove this threat once and for all. But on the other hand, we're facing all kinds of challenges in the international arena, the United Nations, and of course, condemnations galore. They like to condemn Israel every Monday and Thursday. So that is precisely what the government has been deliberating right now. And I, for one, believe that you can postpone, but you have to take the decision once and for all, because this thing might even deteriorate to a more extreme situation because of the situation in Egypt, the support that the various Palestinian terrorist organizations now are enjoying on the part of the masses. And who knows how the military who are governing this country of Egypt, how they will respond to this kind of pressure on the one hand from the people, as they did when they burned the Israeli flag on the embassy, and on the other hand from the U.S. and from Israel, and from their need to maintain their credibility over the peace treaty with Israel. And we can't apply any pressure. It's for them to decide, the Egyptian military who are in charge.
Doesn't the delaying the inevitable only make matters worse when Judgment Day, so to speak, comes? Because we've seen how how Hamas has improved its military might just in the 2 years since Operation Cast Lead.
There's no doubt. You're absolutely right. But, you know, you can say the same thing about so many things that we have undergone since the establishment of the state. I mean, with the Syrians back in the 50s and the 60s, with the Egyptians before the peace treaty and all. And you cannot solve the problem entirely and exclusively by military means.
دعا أنصار ثورة 14 من فبراير في البحرين الشعوب العربية والإسلامية إلى إحياء يوم القدس العالمي.
Supporters of the February 14th revolution in Bahrain called on Arabs and Muslims to commemorate the International Al-Quds, or Jerusalem Day, which is founded by Imam Khomeini, may God bless his soul. Supporters of the revolution released a statement calling on Muslims across the world to take part in protests and sit-ins on Al-Quds Day to condemn the crimes of the Israeli entity and denounce the world's arrogance. The statement also stressed on the importance of participating in great numbers to make the U.S. and Western countries miss the opportunity to conspire against the people of the region and the revolutionary regime supporting liberation movements and revolutions. Popular protests swept across a number of cities and villages in Bahrain, during which demonstrators chanted against the regime's policies and demanded change and freedom. They also chanted in condemnation of the authorities' targeting of religious figures and the mistreatment of religious scholar Sheikh Isa Qasim. Security forces used the power of weapons to disperse the protesters.
In one voice, these masses poured into the streets of Bahrain's cities and villages. They insist on getting the demands they have been calling for since mid-February, and they are adamant on attaining change and justice. From the town of Bilad al-Qadim to the city of Sitra and Sharkan, then to the area of Tubli and Ras al-Ruman, a human chain took to the streets to protest the policies of the Bahraini regime. They demanded the downfall. Night marches took over the streets of many Bahraini cities and villages. Demonstrators demanded the Bahraini regime immediately release the detainees, as indicated in their chants. Despite the peaceful nature of the protests, the regime's security forces met them as usual with the language of violence and bullets in order to disperse the demonstrators. Mass popular protests took place in the villages of Ali and Dar Kulayb in solidarity with the religious authority. Demonstrators chanted against the regime's targeting of religious symbols and the Bahraini Minister of Justice's aggression on religious scholar Sheikh Isa Qasim. Their demands have not changed and their voice has not been suppressed. They want its echo to reach the entire world. They say their intifada or uprising will continue until their demands of freedom, change, and democracy are met.
Dozens of citizens took to the streets of Erbil to demand an end to the military operations by Turkish forces on Iraqi border cities and villages.
Protesters called on the central government to adopt a serious stance to stop the nearly daily shelling.
Angry protesters flowed onto the streets of Erbil and erupted as one when they reached the Turkish consulate. They demonstrated against Turkey's repeated aggressions and violations of Iraq's Kurdistan region.
All of us are gathered here today. We came from across Kurdistan to condemn and denounce the chauvinistic attacks on our Kurdistan.
Residents of Kurdistan's city of Erbil participated in the protests, with all social strata represented, including teachers, students, employees, businessmen, artisans and intellectuals. They condemned the Turkish Air Force's violation of Iraqi Kurdistan's CAM airspace and the Turkish warplanes shelling of villages, cities and districts in the region.
We are here to express that the Kurdish people are peaceful people. We peacefully express that we are peaceful and don't want war. We are able to protect our borders, but we do not want war. We use all peaceful means. We want all countries, the Arab League, and the superpowers to hear us and defend our rights.
The people were enraged by the martyrdom of 7 members of the same family, including young children, in this barbaric shelling. The shelling was launched under the pretext that alleged members or headquarters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party are located in areas near the Turkish-Iraqi border.
As a civil, non-governmental organization, we organized peaceful protests in front of the Turkish consulate. We are protesting the Turkish Air Force's deceitful bombing of innocent civilians in Erbil and the killing of 7 members of the same family. This shelling is brutal, and we strongly condemn these barbaric attacks.
Massive demonstrations and overwhelming protests swept across the streets of Erbil. The public's indignation is unprecedented. It is a result of the continuous and unjustified Turkish aggressions of the Iraqi Kurdistan region.
Over 2,000 corpses have been found buried in a number of mass graves in the Indian-controlled Kashmir. Human Rights Watch has urged India to immediately investigate the case of mass graves. Sean Abad has that story.
International rights watchdog Human Rights Watch has called on India to immediately open an independent, transparent and credible investigation into the unmarked graves discovered in Indian-controlled Kashmir. South Asia Director for Human Rights Watch Meenakshi Ganguly in a statement said, "For years Kashmiris have been lamenting their lost loved ones. Their pleas ignored or dismissed as the government and army claimed that they had gone to Pakistan to become militants. But these graves suggest the possibility of mass murder. The authorities should immediately investigate each and every death." An inquiry by the police investigation team of the Jammu and Kashmir State Human Rights Commission has found 2,730 bodies dumped into unmarked graves in 4 of the state's 14 districts. Hundreds of people marched the streets of city centre of summer capital Srinagar, demanding the probe into the matter. President of Pro-India People's Democratic Party, who was heading the protest march, has strongly condemned the government's inaction over the issue.
We want an independent and impartial inquiry into the issue of mass graves so that the families of the people who have been dumped into these graves will get the clear idea of what happened to their dear ones.
Over the past 2 decades of bloodshed in Kashmir, thousands of Kashmiris have been forcibly disappeared. Their whereabouts are still unknown. The human rights groups fear their presence inside these unknown graves. Indian security forces in Kashmir have been accused of murdering innocent civilians in staged gun battles and passing them off as separatist militants to earn rewards and promotions. Indian authorities have consistently denied systematic human rights violations in Kashmir and say they probe all such reports and punish the guilty. Meanwhile, media personnel from all the major media organizations were seen protesting over the high-handedness of police towards the pressmen while covering events in Kashmir.
Media is the fourth estate. Either they should accept that media has to work or they must issue a government order prohibiting media in Kashmir.
Last week, 2 lensmen, local and foreign, were beaten to pulp by the state police while they were covering riots in the summer capital's old city.
I show my press ID
And when they saw that I'm pressed from the journalists, they beat me up more savage, than the other guys. So they dragged me on the roads to the police station, and over maybe 20 minutes they were beat me up.
Kashmir issue is the root cause of bitter territorial dispute between India and Pakistan over the past 6 decades. Official figures say nearly 50,000 people have been killed in the region's unrest over the past 2 decades. Over the past many years, human rights watchdogs around the world have been asking New Delhi to hold investigations, but so far no probe has been ordered. People of the region say major world powers these days are highly motivated by the economic interests from India, thus can push India to hold investigations into the crimes. Shahana Bhatt, Press TV, Indian administered Kashmir.
In drought and famine-stricken Somalia, there have been fresh reports of an outbreak of cholera epidemic. Press TV correspondent says at least 37 women and children have died of cholera over the last 24 hours. Hundreds of Somali children with cholera have been rushed to southern Mogadishu hospitals. The World Health Organization says over 4,000 cholera cases have been reported from Benadir Hospital alone. Meanwhile, aid agencies are calling for urgent international response to help contain the disease. About 75% of those affected are children under the age of 5. Poor sanitation and shortage of safe water supplies threaten the lives of hundreds of thousands of Somali children.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.